Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. I hope you all had a great dance upstairs. Give me a wave if you actually went. Wow, two people over there actually went and did the dance. That must have been fun, right? Was it fun? You just watched. Okay, for those of you who haven't been in the room so far today, we've had a great morning already. We played rock, paper, scissors, which was good fun in this room, but we also had some incredible talks. And I know that you're not here to see me babble on, so I won't babble on for too long. What I'll just remind us of is that we are using Slido during this if you've got questions for our panelists, so please just go on slido.com, and the hashtag for that is just hashtag Pioneers19. We are in Launchpad. Don't click the other stage. Your questions will be sent to the wrong place. But we're going to get right on, and we're talking about investments as a catalyst between Asia, Europe, and the US. We've got a great panel lined up for you, which will be hosted by Ariel Kramer, who's over here, and we're going to have Roman Schaaf, Marvin Liao, Amy Wu, Cheryl Fu, and Trevor Trainer coming to the stage. Let's give a huge round of applause as we invite our panelists up to the stage. Let's keep that applause going.
Great. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good? Great. Enthusiastic crowd we got. So I wanted to start off the panel by having everyone introduce themselves. Just do a quick introduction. Roman, would you like to start?
Okay, sure. I'm Roman. I founded Capital 300 last year after being an entrepreneur for more than 20 years between Europe and the US. Capital 300 is a fund that has raised $50 million to do A and B round investments in Central European startups, always together with partners from Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Trevor Trainer. I'm the American ambassador to Austria, and in a previous, not too distant life, a serial tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. I founded or co-founded 5 startups in Silicon Valley and sold them to companies like Microsoft and Intuit, et cetera.
Hi, my name is Cheryl. Vertex Capital is a fund of funds in the energy sector. We invest primarily in blockchain and AI for the energy sector. And we're based between Singapore, London, and New York.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Wu. I'm a partner on the Lightspeed growth team, and Lightspeed is a global investment platform. We do everywhere from seed, Series A to late stage investing, and we have offices in U.S. Where I'm based in San Francisco, also China, India, Israel, and we also cover collectively Europe as well. And I was an operator before as a group CFO of a Discovery media company in Singapore and the U.S.
Hi everyone, my name is Marvin. I'm partner at 500 Startups. 500 Startups is an early stage venture capital fund. We have about $500 million under management. We invest globally, so we invested in, I think, over 2,200 companies over the last 8 years in 75 countries.
Great. Trevor, you can have the mic. I would like to ask you first, as an entrepreneur, we're going to start off by talking about what do you believe are the risks and rewards when it comes to international expansion for a company?
Well, it's actually interesting because before becoming ambassador to Austria, my last company, If Only, was looking at exactly that, international expansion. And the appeal to business is that you're already online, you're already doing business, particularly if you're any kind of a consumer marketplace or platform. So it's really easy to imagine extending your business globally from a support point of view on the technical side. But then what you also have to weigh are all the local and regulatory issues and logistical issues, right? Even if you can do business from one location primarily, where do you have to set up offices? Where do you have to file for stuff? What do you have to do? And so that can be incredibly overwhelming for small companies and far more expensive than you might think. And so startup companies need to be really strategic about weighing the benefit of tapping a global market with what are some of the hidden or unexpected costs and burdens of supporting it. Sometimes that equation is a good one and the math works out. Sometimes it makes more sense to either go regionally or even country by country, and sometimes it just doesn't make sense.
Fantastic. Marvin, I know that you've had a lot of experiences, obviously, with dealing with international companies. So what do you think on this topic when it comes to international expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reality is that business principles are the same in every single country. I think it's about understanding, it's like 80% the same. It's about understanding the 20% that are different in each of the regions and each of the countries. I actually ran international expansion at Yahoo for almost a decade.
Okay,
and
great.
we kind of sucked at it. I mean, most US companies suck at that.
And why did you suck at it?
I mean, you learn. You learn by making a lot of mistakes, and these mistakes are like really expensive. And this is Yahoo. We were doing $6 billion in revenue a year, and it's just you can afford those mistakes. I think as an early stage startup, it's a lot more challenging.
What do you think are the most common mistakes that companies make?
I think you have to hire locals. I think that's very, very important. I hate that term locals, but you have to hire like locals. And I would say the other part, as part of international expansion, I think one of the co-founding team needs to also be in the region, based out there, not just flying in every once in a while. You have to be based there and actually put your home down for like a couple of years and be integrated.
Great. Now, Amy, I know you and I were talking with Marvin yesterday regarding this topic about how the importance of having maybe an office established in the various countries that you wish to invest in. Do you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can speak to how a VC thinks about that and how a company should probably think about that.
Yes.
In VC. Lightspeed's philosophy is that we really try to meet the entrepreneur early, and it's really difficult to do that without people in the ecosystem 4 years with a reputation of having invested in companies that have exited and then backing entrepreneurs coming out of those companies. Mm-hmm. And so that's why our Israel, China, India team have been investors in those markets for over 10 years, and we're trying to get more. We're trying to expand our presence here in Europe, and thinking about standing up a team here as well to really be able to cover more than just London, Paris, flying in, but the rich ecosystem throughout. And in terms of companies thinking about expansion, it's I think it's important to think about it regionally because there's going to be more similarities. I mean, there's going to be challenges that you can both tackle because of geographic closeness, like for example in APAC by thinking about, okay, well, should I establish an HQ and a regional HQ in APAC at some point, and maybe off the back of a growth stage of funding, because I have a lot of inbound there. It seems like good timing. There's there's a backlog of customers, and I can support the needs better by having an on the ground team there. Which country do I do it in? The pros and cons, understanding the business friendliness, right, of each of your decision, and I think those are. I think it's really, really important. And for Europe, and I think probably one of the leading questions to ask is where are most of your inbound leads coming from? Mm-hmm. And then also, is it going to be easy to expand and also allow you to be flexible depending on where you're putting roots in the region?
Do you think that having these roots in these various regions also make an impact on understanding the culture when it comes to investing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're selling, which every single startup is selling to somebody, right. It's really important to be able to speak their language, right? And so it's absolutely important. Just like it's important to hire local leaders and to have a mix of local, just a predominantly local team that really understands the culture, understands how to brand market to them, the materials, et cetera. But then also infuse it with the DNA from HQ, right? Both are really important, I think, to be successful.
Great, thank you. And Roman, you have spent some time in the U.S., in Los Angeles, and between Silicon Valley, and now
10 years, yes.
10 years, and now you are back in Europe. So can you please explain what are the differences that you've seen, and what are the pros and cons to each place?
Well, I founded 3 companies in Europe and 2 in the US. One of the obvious facts that people think is true is really true. It's much easier in the US to found a company, especially in a startup environment. There is a much more developed ecosystem. I was able to start my businesses in Silicon Valley, right. And everything there is basically built around the idea of starting companies. Being a founder there is like a privilege, like a very important title that gets you attention and gets you a certain degree of appreciation. In Europe, I feel like founders are more seen still like, capitalistic people who only want to make money. People forget that everybody who works for someone works for something that has been founded by someone earlier on. That's the one side. The other side that I saw is that for me it was easier to recruit in Europe. I found better people faster. I think there is a cultural difference that is bigger than people think. I also realized when I had teams in different continents that there is a certain type of personality that overlaps. So there's certain Americans that can work really well with people in the UK and in Germany, but there's also people who are not compatible.
Right.
Which doesn't mean that they are not good people. It just means that they are not, I don't know, it has a lot of soft factors, but not all of the Americans work well with Germans and the other way around. Some do, and it's almost like an art to figure out how to assemble your teams so that works out in a good way. And I also saw that it's very important that your processes are solid enough before you start connecting continents. If you're too early, it is more damaging than there is benefits.
So there's a lot of Series A rounds and Series B rounds happening in Europe, but you don't see much beyond that. Why do you think that is?
Well, the venture capital world in Europe is by far not as developed as in North America. The UK is like a hybrid. It's a little bit in between. Also, Sweden has a very well-developed financial market compared to the size of the country. I was astonished, and it was one of the reasons why I started Capital 300. After coming back 10 years in Silicon Valley, I never considered the availability of funds an issue, and I expected when I come back that Europe has caught up. It hasn't. So we are doing $2 to $10 million in A rounds, and sometimes we do B rounds. For an entrepreneur in Austria, Germany, or Eastern countries, there's almost no choices if you want to raise 5 or 8 or 10 million. Where do you go? There's a lot of people who can give you $500,000, 250,000, even €1 million. But if you need 8 million euros because your company is already on an extremely good traction, you read a book by Reid Hoffman about blitzscaling, and you want to go all in and you want to rock it globally. Where do you get $8 or $10 million from in Europe? It's really hard. There's 2 or 3 players in London. But there's 100 players in the US who can do that. So our idea was to basically fill that empty space, and Capital 300 is now doing that and doing it together with partners because they are so much better at it. I'm a first-time VC. I've only been on the other side. I've raised way more than $100 million for 5 companies, and I had exits. But I have not, been a professional investor. So I thought when we do deals, and in the end, we do them with the best VCs in the world, we'll get a very strong portfolio. Our LPs are local players. So if we have a very strong portfolio and we create a lot of return for our local LPs, then they will reinvest into the ecosystem. Right. And, 5-10 years fast forward, there will be a better environment. Of course, we can't improve the situation on our own, but we can make a contribution.
Great. And Trevor, I know that you are working with some companies here in Europe, and you're bringing your expertise from the US. How are you connecting the US and Europe in terms of this?
Well, one of the things that I do as the American ambassador that I enjoy the most is actually work with Austrian entrepreneurs. And people always say, well, you're the American ambassador, why are you helping Austrian companies? And there's a couple of reasons. I think the first is that when I think about America, sort of like what Roman said, one of the great things about America is the spirit we have of can do, that we do believe anyone with an idea ought to be allowed the opportunity to try and make it into a reality. And so it's kind of something that we also offer to the world, is that spirit. And I think that spirit is really alive in Austria. I am so impressed with the entrepreneurs I meet here, the quality of their ideas, their initiative. I think they're every bit the equals to the entrepreneurs I know in Silicon Valley. What doesn't exist in Europe, and it's really not a knock on Austria, is it's just an unfriendly environment for starting companies. I always say, it's a miracle when you start a company and it becomes big and successful. It's like being out camping in the wilds and you're trying to create a fire with 2 sticks or something. And, everything has to be perfect. No wind, no rain, whatever, to get that first spark and get it to grow. And in Europe, you have wind and rain and all kinds of stuff that just stand over this flame trying to shelter it while it can grow a little bit. And so, my heart goes out to entrepreneurs here because it's hard enough to start a company. And then when you're immediately taxed and it takes you a year to set up the entire corporate entity and you have these other burdens, it's like almost impossibly hard. So wherever I can help them. And also I see ideas that I also invest. I mean, I've invested in Uber and Dropbox and many of the big success companies of today. And I see potential in these companies too.
All right, great. Cheryl, do you find that same experience in Singapore when it comes to investing?
Sorry, finding the same experience in Singapore
When it
with
comes
regards
to
setting
funding,
up.
for example, and investing. How do you guys work with the different series, and do you find it's easy to gain capital in Singapore?
So in Asia, we work primarily with family offices coming from Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, East Asia mostly. In Singapore, we work closely also with government funding. So I think one difference, in my short experience in Europe, between Europe and Asia is that in Asia, the governments are very supportive. We work closely with, for example, government institutional investors, and they do a lot of government matching funds, things like that. So I think that's very important for the ecosystem. I really agree with what Trevor said about the difficulty of setting up a company here. And if there is a mature startup that wants to expand overseas, I would say your general counsel is one of the most important stakeholders in your firm, simply because we're actually experiencing the same thing. We're trying to set up a fund in Vienna compared to Luxembourg. And we work with Lansky, which is one of the best law firms. But at the same time, it's incredibly difficult. And if we can't do it, I think even the startup is finding it very hard. Having said that, going back to my first point, the Lisbon, we are very interested in Eastern Europe, and Vienna is a gateway to Eastern Europe. So Portugal right now has issued a 200 million government fund that we are going to work with to raise with institutional investors. So I think there are sparks and hubs of activity led by governments and institutions that could be an interesting source of funding for startups.
Right. When it comes to investing in different countries, do you have certain criteria when it comes to each of those? So if you're in Europe or Asia or the US, are there different factors that you consider for each?
Yeah, so I come from the energy sector, which is a very old, archaic dinosaur industry. I would say the main criteria is really partnerships and the relationships and the team. Obviously, also the viability of the technology and the market fit. For us, we really invest in people and not necessarily. I guess the technology is very important, but if we really believe in the founder and his relationships and his ability to take it further, we trust that a lot. Other criteria obviously includes the term sheets and all the usual stuff in investments.
All right, great. Amy, what's been your experience when it comes to that?
I definitely agree with Cheryl. There are more similar, and also, Marvin, also the 80-20, or I think investing probably like 90-10 in terms of, it's always about the team, first and foremost. Honestly, at every stage, it's really important, right?
So even if somebody has a brilliant idea, but you don't feel that there's a good personality fit, for example.
Well, the later stage it is, right?
Absolutely.
If you're a late stage company, let's say doing like 50 to 100 million in revenue, then, growth investors are always thinking, okay, well, how does the DNA of the company shift if we have to, augment the team with additional new people at the early stage? It is all about that founding team, of course. Yeah, and then of course, once I would say starting like Series A now. Because Series A people, a lot of investors are starting to look for early traction, and then certainly on the growth side, then it's really about the numbers. And I think sometimes the scale of the numbers I would have different expectations probably in terms of how fast they got there. If it's an Asia company, like in India and China, for example, just because of their peer set and how fast they were able to get to a certain scale, like $1 billion GMV for like a marketplace company, et cetera, versus in US Europe, which I think share more similarities
Right.
than have differences, and so I think there's some differences there. And valuations, there's again, like, in certain markets and certain places, like certain sectors, you might see some variance in valuation. But again, there are just generally like more similarities than differences, I think.
Have you made any notable investments lately that have kind of brought these markets, these three different markets together?
Let me think. I'm 3 weeks into Lightspeed, so I'm brand new. So I
So you've
personally
made so
haven't
many by now,
I'm looking for opportunities. But I mean, the fund that you're working. I would say like Lightspeed makes probably 3 to 4 investments a month,
Right.
and most of them are in earlier stage. And so I think the batch of companies that have grown to a stage where, let's say they're well established in Europe and now looking to expand into the U.S., which I think happens a lot in like Series B, probably like around 10 million ARR, or like their Asia company, like an Indian company like Udon, and starting to think about, okay, well, what's our China strategy? I think I'm seeing a lot of that within the portfolio.
Right. And Marvin, how many companies are you typically investing in per month?
Well, ranges, so I probably do about 70 to 80 a year, typically. I can answer one of the questions about Southeast Asia, right? And so a big part of our thesis is actually arbitrage, right? So going out to regions where there's an imbalance between sort of like talent versus sort of money. And so in regards to Southeast Asia, I would argue there's actually way too much money and it's actually not enough talent. The region is growing. It's a super interesting area, but there's just so much money from like, there's local money, so Singaporean, Indonesian, lots of Chinese and lots of Japanese money that's actually flooded into the ecosystem. So valuations tend to be very, very high.
Okay.
I actually think in Europe is actually the reverse. I think there's just way more talent than money. And so, for example, like there is actually quite a lot of money in the early stage, as sort of Roman's thesis is, there's nothing beyond sort of the Series B. So most of the companies, if you look at the very, very successful European companies, most of them had to go to the US to raise their like C's and D's in general. And that's an opportunity. I even think in the seed stage, there's actually not a lot of really, really good seed investors. And so most of the investments, most of my successful investments have actually come out of like Europe and Canada. And we believe in arbitrage of just like finding them, bringing them to the US, raising and keeping their engineering teams actually back home. So wherever it is, in Paris, in Barcelona, in Vancouver and Toronto. And so we're seeing a lot of synergies in that perspective. Like tech talent in the US is ridiculously expensive, ridiculously disloyal. And they flip like, Silicon Valley is good and bad, right? Like there's so many opportunities. So literally I've seen engineers just like change companies and they're still working in the same building, right? Just like a different floor.
Right. Yeah, Roman, he has definitely something to say.
Just last week I picked up an article. So the entry-level engineering salary at Facebook and Google has now crossed $120,000. That's how you get a junior guy that brings the coffee in and learns from others
That
to
sounds
be
fabulous.
productive. There's always this thesis that in Europe you have a lot of social cost on the net pay that the person receives, but still overall, it's especially for engineers, it's much cheaper. I think they're not in any way inferior. And the loyalty thing is actually a really big deal. So in America, someone who gives them a hiring bonus, they're gone. Like they jump every 12 months, bum, bum, bum. Look at their LinkedIn profiles. It's crazy how hard it is to retain talent. And when you are in a startup environment, you need to build, right? So you need people to stay so that you can build, and grow. If all the people are always churning, then you can never have meaningful results.
I mean, Central Eastern Europe region is super interesting because it's just the incredible breadth and sort of like level of tech talent in general. And especially you can see a lot more distributed teams. Like I said, most of my successful companies have substantial operations based out in Central Eastern Europe with a sales and marketing team in the US.
Right.
I was going to say one last thing to add, and maybe speaks to your question as to why there needs to be more growth investing, or there's a gap in growth investing. Is when I compare growth stage companies, I would call it after between 10 and 50 mil ARR is when you have growth investors coming in. The difference is like, I think the technical and product talent is really high here, but I think sales and marketing is often a little bit more behind. And I think it's because, quite frankly, I even see delta in like sales and marketing talent between like East Coast and West Coast US. And so I think it's just like, where are these, like in the enterprise space, it's like, where are these big, like Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, like that's where they really train like a whole generation of like great like sales reps, and I think some of that know-how just hasn't really been widespread. I don't see it as widespread like in Europe, and certainly not in Asia. And so I think for companies to be able to again find at the right stage, finding the right investors that can connect you with that, like best-in-class sales and marketing, to be able to experience and see it. Because I think if you don't see it, it's really hard to understand what it feels like on a day-to-day basis, how they establish processes, how the best like brand marketers like think about like performance marketing, channel allocation, and are using completely automated like tools now to allocate, acquisition spend. So I think that this is really good. And as your company is thinking, is scaling to kind of like that growth round post Series A, something that's important to think about.
Great. We have 5 minutes left. So we have a couple questions from the audience that I want to go through. So the first one that we have is, when it comes to international investments, isn't the law aspect quite problematic? Since every country regulates their laws concerning companies differently. So Cheryl, do you want to start and speak to that? Since you've been working both Asia and...
Absolutely. Of course, it is very problematic. That's why I said, hiring a great law firm is very important.
Yes.
I can only speak for the energy sector. So we orchestrate a lot of corporate PPAs and things like that. The question is, since every country regulates their laws concerning companies differently, basically what should you do? Mine's is very simple, just hire a great international law firm like Baker McKinsey or a local one. In terms of investments, we are at the moment trying to enter Eastern Europe, so that's something that we are very careful about, and that's why we choose Vienna, because it's the hub and gateway to Eastern Europe. We wouldn't set up an office or fund in Bucharest, for example, simply because of the ecosystem. So I don't think I really answered the question, but...
Great. Marvin, go ahead.
I mean, there are some countries that are just really challenging to invest in, right? So, like, for example, I can give listings, like Germany's a nightmare to invest in because the whole like notarization and legal crap that you have to do there. Spain, surprisingly, is actually really challenging, like legal, and just like there's a lot of tax implications. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China are like nightmares to invest in, like just really, really, really hard. Ireland, UK, very, very good. Like just very, very easy to invest in. Luxembourg, obviously, very, very easy to invest in. So it actually matters a lot. Singapore is super easy to invest in. Malaysia's actually pretty all right. Indonesia can be challenging. Philippines is a nightmare.
So basically, you should move if you live in any of those countries. Great. So we have the second is, how has CFIUS impacted CFIUS, impacted the dynamic of investment? Marvin, you can speak.
It hasn't yet, but I think it is changing. So, for example, if you have Chinese venture capitalists, on your board, it is going to make it more difficult, and that has definitely affected a lot of. Just don't take Russian money, right? Like that's really, really hard to do in general. I don't think you haven't really seen the results yet. But for example, we used to be able to take like observer board seats, and we just don't do that anymore because of it's just more challenging. Right. And I think also I also think it will affect where VC funds raise money from.
Right. Robin, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I completely agree with Marvin. It's challenging when you have to be involved in any official capacity, like as a director. It is probably going to make people consider where the LPs come from. Like, for instance, even before, we were not advised to ever take US money into our European fund. We have this structure which is called the EUVECA, which is the European Venture Capital Regulation. And if you have US LPs in there, it becomes incredibly complicated, almost too complicated to run a fund. and I think people have to just more and more include those aspects into their structure.
Yeah. And I'd also say it really depends on the spaces that you're in. So, for example, if you're like semiconductors and biotech, anything cybersecurity related, boy, you just can't take foreign money in the U.S. I just think it'd be really, really challenging.
All right. So this is a great question, I think. Do you advise European companies to set up a U.S. corporation from the beginning to ease investment and avoid tax
I get this question all the
problems?
time. Like, seriously. We don't advise companies to just found a U.S. parent. Like, the most popular one is, do I need a Delaware Corp? Well,
no taxes.
The answer is it helps in certain situations. It doesn't make a difference in other situations. There's no. It's not a black and white situation. I think it's always important to consider, several aspects. There's a tax aspect. There's an IP aspect. Where are you in the stage of the company? I mean, to basically create a Delaware head if you are in the C round is probably kind of late. Some people do it even before they go and look for seed investors. That's kind of very early. It's kind of...
That's way early.
Yeah. So I think there's no answer, yes or no. It depends. It can be a good thing.
Great. I thought this was a great last question. Besides investments, what else should be done to create better connections between the U.S., Europe, and Asia, especially in the startup chain? Trevor, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think exchange is the first thing. So at the U.S. Embassy here, we work extensively with Austrian entrepreneurs, and we do every month breakfasts with the VKU. We co-host where I attend, and we have other guests who come. I've brought Marissa Meyer and Reid Hoffman and people like that to come talk to entrepreneurs. We send entrepreneurs to Austin on a fixed program, Austria to Austin. We cooperate with the VKO on sending entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley. And I think that this cross-pollination at the entrepreneur level is really important because then they pick up a lot of the best practices in both places. I always say to American entrepreneurs, you should start a company like Austrians do. It's incredible. They spend no money and they get to profitability really quickly. And in America, we can burn millions of dollars just, buying Aeron chairs and picking the right kind bars for the snacks. So I think the cross-pollination at the entrepreneur level is really productive.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to all the panelists.